I'm Dr. Joseph MD, Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai. This is the E-Pathshala project on religion and society. Now we look at Module 5. Module 5 looks at the Orientalist and Indological constructions of religion and society in India. Now both of these constructions have had a bearing on the way that we understand and live religions and religious lives in India today. Both of these have evolved from a historical moment, the historical moment of colonialism. Orientalism as a concept was first named clearly by Edward Said. Orientalism refers to the way that the West understands itself in juxtaposition to the East or the Orient. Or rather, Orientalism is the way that the West has created its other, the Orient, the East. And we can see the traces of this Orientalism in most of the knowledge production that colonial powers and colonial intellectuals and colonial administrators and missionaries have engaged in. The corpus of knowledge, especially about religion, produced by the colonial powers or colonial rulers or colonial administrators or missionaries on India, bears the mark of Orientalism. Orientalism, the Orient as the mystic other of the rational West. And what has happened is that some of these studies have evolved into a very distinct school of thought called Indology. Now, most of the Indologists have looked at India and Indian religions, Indian religious systems from a very textual point of view. Because the sources of knowledge about Indian culture and society and religion for the early colonial administrators and intellectuals was the literate class or the caste that were the Brahmins. And the Brahmins constructed Indian society and culture for the Westerners from the texts that they had produced or that were available to them. So Indology developed a corpus of knowledge about India and Indian religions from the text point of view, which had no bearing at all, and in sometimes the text point of view is far removed from the field point of view of the Indian society. And therefore, both the Orientalist discourse and the Indological discourse have its own power dynamics of power and knowledge. But at the same time, these two discourses have been very dominant in the way that we understand India and experience India, especially in the realm of religion and society. So we will look at in this module in very detail about these processes of the development of these two discourses and the concepts and the ideas developed by the people, by different scholars, both Westerners and Indians, in these two dominant ways of understanding India, Indian religions and Indian cultures and Indian systems of thought. Now, these are two different kind of constructions of religion that we are looking at. One is Indological, the other one is Orientalist. Now both are interconnected and both have got connection to the history of colonialism in India. And we will look at each of these separately. Now before that, it's important to look at where are the sources of these both constructions coming from. And we can say that it is coming from travelers, it is coming from British government officials, and it is coming from missionaries. And with the kind of data that is from all of these people, their ideas, their empirical data, their interpretations, all of that, both of these Indological and Orientalist constructions have happened. Now, in addition to this, we all know that from 1871, the census of India was started. And along with that, there has been an ethnographic survey of India based on every district, every place. And these surveys were taken off in due time and published as what we call the district gazetteers of India. And what happened is, like, with this ethnographic survey going on, anthropologists became data collectors who were describing India's different traditions. Now we go to each of these separately. The first is the Indological Approach. Now what do we mean by the Indological Approach? Now we begin by understanding it by what is called as native informants. So when the British colonialism started in India, it was important for them to understand India, because it's only through knowledge of the people can power be in that sense exercised. So to know India was important, and therefore and when you are a foreigner in a particular land, what you do is like you try to get informants, and that's what the British did. They cultivated a class of native informants and through them they started codifying practices and classifying castes and making up rules and regulations. Now, the Brahmins, being the educated class who had access to knowledge, had already elaborated on the Varna fourfold classification theory, as we know in the Manusmriti and in other places. But with this new kind of profile that they got as native informants to the British about the Indian social structure, they used the fourfold classification, and they were able to capitalize on the new opportunities presented by the British at that time. Now, the thing is, like, the Indological approach is also called the text view of Indian society, because the texts of religion, or primarily of Hinduism, are indeed considered as accurate guides to understand society and culture of the Hindus. Now, this is where the problem lies. It is a text-centered view of society. Now, several of the British officials, with the help of their local Brahmins, translated these texts, therefore, and thereby projecting a Brahmanical view of Indian society to the whole world. Now, according to this text-based textual Indological view, Indian society is a set of religious beliefs that the upper caste Hindus followed, which means it because they were the persons who codified these texts, they were the persons who constructed knowledge, and they were persons who were recruited and selected as native informants by the British. What happened is that the views of the upper caste Hindus became naturalized as the views of all Indians. So once the British had defined something as an Indian custom or traditional dress, or the proper form of a situation or a salutation, any deviation from it was defined as a rebellion or an act to be punished. Now, what has happened is that due to this text view of society, due to this Indological view of society, which privileged the upper caste view as the view of everyone, as the legitimized view of the Indian society, any kind of a difference, any kind of a change, any kind of a pluralism in this was seen as a deviation or a rebellion, which had to be contained, which had to be legally addressed, and which had to be punished. And therefore, it followed that India was redefined by the British to be a place of rules and order. Once the British had defined it to their own satisfaction, what they constructed as Indian rules and customs, then the Indians had to conform to these constructions. Now, this is important. The British, through its Indological approach, laid down, codified, and made it very explicit that these are the rules and regulations of people in India. And if anyone did not obey these rules and regulations to the extent that was laid down, action was taken up against them. Okay, now one example of the Indological approach and its influence on the study of India and of religion is the work of Louis Dumont. His Indological characterization of Indian society in his work Homo Hierarchicus. Now, what Dumont saw was a timeless ideology of caste hierarchy, which was replicated at every level of Indian society and culture. Now, in his treatise, Dumont looks at, it is not that he does not look at opposition to caste hierarchy, he looks at them, he even talks about them, but at the end of the day, he looks at caste hierarchy as overarching, as something that goes beyond all kinds of differences and all kinds of opposition to it. So that is something very important, and therefore we can look at his work as a classical case where Indological and textual material or text-based material has been used extensively to construct analysis of Indian society. Now, also like Indian society, the Indological approach is also
non-historical in that sense, because it does not historicize the findings. It essentializes what being Indian means, and it has also another interesting kind of a twist, because it takes from mainly Hindu sources, and so many years of Islamic kind of influence, which would be around 1,000 years or so, is not seen as relevant to the idea of India at all, and so is the influence of European history on India as well. So there is a way in which Hinduism and India gets collated or correlated in the Indological approach, and giving way to a holistic understanding, a very problematic holistic understanding of the Hindu social order and hierarchy. Now we go to the second approach, which is the Orientalist approach. Now, this is a little different from the Indological approach. The Indian reformers tried to initiate an Indian Renaissance while being exposed to the criticisms of Christian missionaries as well as British liberalism of the 19th century. Early studies by European scholars were often tinted with their own cultural prejudices. These prejudices also shaped the views of the Indian intelligentsia. Amongst the missionaries, there was an attempt to condemn Hindu society for its many evils. Gurye, for example, G.S. Gurye, one of the sociologists who is said to have used a lot of Indological material, Gurye's sociology drew heavily on the traditions of British and German Orientalism that had emerged out of the 18th century European debates on nature and the origin of civilization, and the West's fascination with what were thought to be the earliest civilizations. Another scholar who influenced the study of religion in India was Vivekananda, the founder of the Ramakrishna mission. He placed particular emphasis upon the spirituality of the Indian culture and as a curative for the nihilism and materialism of modern Western cultures. In Vivekananda's hands, Orientalist notions of India as otherworldly and mystical were embraced and praised as India's special gift to the humankind. Now, this missionary construction of India being otherworldly and mystical and magical was something that Vivekananda turned on its head and projected it as a kind of a success story or something part of the Indian culture. Now, what we need to do is also to go into the way that some people have critically looked at both of these Indological and Orientalist approaches. For example, Bernard Cohen explains how the establishment of the ethnographic survey of India as part of the census played a crucial role in defining the official view of caste. Indians increasingly started to identify themselves as part of endogamous groups owning to the constant need for government applications in the country, and which were being in that sense done by the subjects of the country. The religious construction of knowledge by the British not only constructed the predominant Western image of India, but it also contributed to a sense of self-awareness that the Indians went on to describe. So if you look at these processes, it should also be added that Edward Said is the one who actually gave us the idea of Orientalism in the first place. But here Orientalism is looked at as the way that the Indian life situation or the Indian voice is completely wiped out in this particular thing. Now, to conclude, it is important to note that classical texts or scriptures cannot be taken at the face value, as they go through a series of processes of editing without the historical journey. So now the thing is, like, how do we approach a text or a scripture from a sociological point of view? We have to place this text in a history, and therefore taking that historical content into consideration when we look at rules, regulations, structures and texts is more important. And it also paves the way for an independent individual thinking on the matter. Secondly, yet the textual interpretation must be both conducted only in the context of the social context of culture and society in which it is found. Now, what happens is, like, there is a very close connection between what the text, the ritual, and the community in which you live. The community will have a legitimizing kind of a principle on the culture that is on offer, which has also to be seen very clearly. Now, social anthropology itself was formed as a discourse rooted in a Eurocentric view of the world. The early theories of social evolutionary theories like Mayer and Tybert Morgan are an evidence of this kind. And the most well-known statement had been attributed to the liberal English statesman Lord Macaulay, also the Governor General and President of the General Committee of Public Institutions, who said, "The aim of the English education was to create a class of persons in Indian in color and blood, but English in taste, opinions, and material and morals." Now, this is a very famous quotation, attributed to the English statesman Macaulay, but which has been very quite often quoted by others as well. To Macaulay, the political or military conquest was important compared to the conquest over the minds. It is also of much importance to know the duality of the subject. Croix, subject-object, better known insider-outsider, while understanding the context when within or within which the knowledge about cultures came to be constructed. Indian culture came to be generalized as Hindu culture, which further was presupposed and romanticized as being mystical, as opposed to its tradition. Rational cultures adopt a very different kind of understanding, which are opposed to the otherworldly views of the East, came to define the dualities of the West and the East. The idea of duality involved in an inherent power relation of one dominating the other. In this sense, the other is the mystical East, and the soteriological conceptions such as being irrational, ascetic, subjective, and mystical exterior added it to the ever-growing mass of appeal. This kind of othering also involves an inherent form of subordination and exclusion. In conclusion, we understand that most Orientalist works functioned to portray Indian thoughts, institutions, and practices, and as distortions of the normative ideal of Western thought. Read Edward Said's book Orientalism for a better understanding of the term, along with it is on the critical reviews. Also make a note of the differences to Foucault's knowledge and power debate within Edward Said's work. If transformed entire cultures into being, subjugated by a superior form of knowledge which was active compared to the Western Indological expert, as that was rational, logical became superior, while the object of their study was deemed inferior.
Conclusion, Module 5. In this module, we have looked at two dominant ways in which religion has been understood in India at the colonial period, which has its influence down to the present time. The one is the Orientalist way of understanding religions or cultures and society in India, and the other is the Indological paradigm. Both of these are interrelated. Both of these had the collaboration of both the Westerners and the Indians. But the way of constructing knowledge has at every level in both of these constructions have come from the West. And this is what we have actually looked at in this module. Thank you.